Hello and welcome to the Bible Matters podcast. My name's Leo Elborn, and this podcast exists to encourage you in faithful Bible teaching and ministry. In today's episode, we're featuring the second talk in the series The Gospel at Work, a talk titled Work is Grim. In this talk, William focuses particularly on Genesis 3 and looks at the curse that God places on the world as a result of the fall, and how the curse affects our work. I found it to be a really helpful talk in understanding why work is as frustrating as it is, and also why we never really find fulfillment in our jobs, despite what they promise to us. I really hope that you find it helpful as well, and that you enjoy listening to this episode.
A few questions. When we say work, is it necessarily paid work? What about those who are full-time mums, homestay dads, etc.? No, absolutely right. Thank you for that very helpful corrective. That's entirely right. Is time out of work, if we can work, always bad? No, it's absolutely wonderful, especially if you do it after you've got some money behind you. You know, having a gap year when you're 50 is absolutely fantastic. So no, it's not always bad. No, not at all. And sometimes we need a break, and sometimes it's necessary. Just remember that very few people in the world have such a privilege. How should I understand gift in the context of Romans 12? Thanks, great question. Again, the gifts there are gifts that God has given to men and women. Some of them, you would say, very ordinary gifts like leadership, but they are gifts which the Holy Spirit has then brought into the church. They're gifts that the Spirit gives to the church. They're manifestations of the Spirit in the church. So they are being used not for, he's a really gifted carpenter, he must go and do carpentry. No, they're gifts for the use of God's people in the church and the advance of the gospel. Work is grim. In these 4 talks, we're considering a topic, obviously, that concerns every one of us, 160 hours in any week. Assuming we work sort of 8 to 10 hours, let's say 10 a day, we travel to work, sleep for 8 hours, well, maybe 7, but, we'll spend around about 50% of our waking life for 5 decades engaged in work. Last time we looked at work in creation as its original design. Genesis 1 teaches us there's dignity in work. God's a worker. Jesus was a carpenter. Paul worked with his hands. Genesis 1 shows us there's responsibility in work. Vertically to God, he entrusts us with the work of his world. Horizontally to other people. And then there's a necessity. If you will not eat, you shall not eat. And now I say then, work is good. And let me say, here's another point somebody made. Maybe you do enjoy your work and you find it hugely stimulating. Wow, that is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get the wrong impression. It's great that you enjoy your work. There's all sorts of work that is really wonderful to do. And if you're in that position, well, fantastic. Thank the Lord. But just remember, God's going to spoil your work ultimately. So we'll come to that in a moment. So just in case you think I was being a bit too negative, it's good because God made it and dignifies it. It's good because God entrusts it to us and holds us accountable for it. It's good because this is the way that the world goes round, the necessity. There's a challenge. All work is good. We're not to be snobbish. And let's not be super spiritual. I've got this special vocation. And David Brooks, describing so much of what the world says about work as garbage advice, particularly at the kind of commencement ceremonies, graduation and so forth. Well, garbage advice may be one way of putting it. It's certainly not biblical advice. And so we're going back to the Bible. And my aim in this talk is to show us that when it comes to our work in this creation, we will never actually fulfill our potential in it. We may enjoy it. We may find it stimulating. But ultimately, work is grim. My kids are very naughty, and like kids do, they tease you. And, work is good. But when my daughter had a year at home starting in teaching, was getting used to work, she would often say, "Oh, Daddy, work is grim." I mean, they know these talks off by heart. So, work is grim, they'll say. And we, help one another with that. We'll always be ultimately frustrated at work. and we will never finally gain true satisfaction through work, and we will find eventually that work is futile. And so I guess, in a sense, if I may put it like this, my aim is to spoil your work in this talk. I'm sorry about that. But I think it's really important, and we'll see why at the end. Or at least limit our expectations at work. And I want us to see as we start that it is the very deliberate purpose of God that we grasp this point. It's immensely important because all the time we try and get back into Genesis 1 without realizing that Genesis 2 through 4 is there. So first, God has cursed work. Secondly, there will be frustration at work. And finally, human work will always be blighted by damage. The place of work is cursed. Says somebody, all this talk about the frustration of work, you're telling me work is grim, I thought you said work is good. Well, yeah, Genesis 1, but then Genesis 2 through 4. Between Genesis 1 and Genesis 4, we find that Adam and Eve rebel against God. This rebellion, which is repeated by every human being who's ever lived since Adam and Eve, apart from the Lord Jesus, changes everything. The author of Genesis 2 through 4 demands that we understand it like this. We should not allow ourselves in any area of life to consider this world without taking the fall with absolute seriousness. Now, I want to be very clear on this because when it comes to work and creativity and design and human activity, many, many, many writers treat the truths of Genesis 1 and 2 as if they can be considered independent of the fall. But the author of Genesis deliberately structures his material in such a way as to show that God demands we do not think about work or life generally apart from the fall and the consequences of our rebellion. And if we fail to get this, we will always live in cloud cuckoo land. So the text of Genesis had no numerical chapters originally, and not even any verse numbers. Did you know that? The Bible text had no chapter numbers and no verse numbers. If you get Tyndale's translation of the New Testament, you'll just find it straight text between the chapters. He puts the chapters in. That's because when he translates the Bible, the chapters had been put in by then. And they were put in by an English archbishop in around about the 12th century. I think was it 11th or 12th century? I can't remember the exact date. 13th century, sorry. So 12-something. Thomas Langton. So originally the text of Genesis, if you'd had it, would have been straight writing without even, in the Greek versions, any gaps between the words. Try that when you're asked to read in public. So the way the authors showed how their material was to be ordered was through what's called literary markers. They gave markers to show that they were starting a new section, and the skilled listener, because people listened in those days, it was an oral culture, the skilled listener was listening for these markers. Interestingly, if you go to Bayeux, you'll see in the Bayeux tapestry that in that piece of writing, there are these kind of markers separated off. Look at Genesis 2:4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Look at Genesis 5:1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. Look at Genesis 6:9. These are the generations of Noah. Look at Genesis 10:1. These are the generations of the sons of Noah. Look at Genesis 11:27. Now these are the generations of Terah. So if you're going to read Genesis properly, you've got to understand these are blocks of material, and they've got to be treated as blocks of material. You can't just skip around the place. Have one reading from here, one reading from here. They are actually deliberately crafted blocks of material. And so from Genesis 2 verse 4, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, through to Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam, we've got one, what would you call it? One episode, perhaps? In other words, Genesis 2 verse 4, the author is telling us how to understand, what does he say? The heavens and the earth when they were created. In other words, this tells us about the foundations of the universe. fail to get this, and you haven't even gone beyond key stage 1. Miss this, as Western culture totally missed it, the fall. And what is more, that it is that the fall, the actual rebellion of Adam and Eve, is literally, if you think in terms of literary style, the centre point on which Genesis 2, 4 through to the end of chapter 3 hinges. It all hinges on Adam or Eve taking that fruit and eating it. In other words, you haven't understood that, you really have not understood anything. My daughter worked in an orphanage, and in that orphanage there was a school, and she worked in the school. And in that school, you weren't able to graduate to the next year until you'd passed the exams of your year. So there were 18-year-olds in class with 10-year-olds. They'd never graduated beyond. And I asked Brendan, who ran the orphanage, why is it like this? How come they never get beyond? He said they never spent floor time with their parents. Hey, mum's at home. This triangle, dad's at home. This square, this puzzle goes into this. You are teaching. That same visit to South Africa, I spoke to the principal of George Whitfield College, and David Seckham said, when I came to South Africa from Australia, I never realised, in order to get PhD students, how important primary school education is. Isn't that striking? You will never understand the world if you haven't understood Genesis 2 through 4. If you do your theology of work from Genesis 1, you will go way off track. The fall is foundational. Fail to get that, you'll be running around this world like an 18-year-old in a class full of 10-year-olds. It's really sad to see. The chapters start with the description of the ideal home, ideal work and ideal marriage, chapter 2. Chapter 3 ends with the description of broken marriage, spoiled work and a broken home. Right in the middle, at the hinge point, we find the rebellion of Adam and Eve. This is tight and careful planning of subject matter. The centre point is the fall. We cannot consider marriage or work or any aspect of this world without reference to the rebellion of humankind against God. Take this chapter, as we did in the last talk, and look at it without considering the impact of the fall, and fail to recognize that, you'll be way off track, as much modern writing on work is way off track. And that's precisely what Genesis 3:17 tells us. To Adam he said, because you've listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you shall not eat, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So you notice why marriage is spoiled in verse 16. I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing, God says. And you notice why the ground is cursed in verse 17, because you. And so God deliberately spoils the workplace for us. God acts in judgment against the work of our hands. Our work will always be frustrated by God because of human rebellion against God. God will not allow us to achieve our potential at work. That is part of his judgment. Oh, says somebody, this is typical William, you're placing too much weight on the fall, you're such an old sado. No. This is precisely the way the text has been arranged under God's hand for us to read it. The person who wants to do a theology of creation without seeing this world is in its entirety impacted by the fall will be profoundly disillusioned. But doesn't this explain why we want to gain such significance, meaning and purpose and enjoyment from our work? Because we were made to work, and work is good. And so much about the graduation ceremony, we love the idea. You got to fulfill your potential and all that sort of stuff. Find what you love. Sorry to the American side of that, but, that's what they say, isn't it? But isn't this why we fail to reach our potential and find true meaning in our work? Because work is grim. There is a divine blockade. Now that explains work, doesn't it? Some of you remember Etienne. Etienne worked in the world of universities, And I met him one Wednesday morning at the beginning before the partnership, and he recounted how an individual high up in the organisation had made a dishonest decision a number of years ago, and the whole organisation had basically been managing decline ever since. And then he said to me, "This has been the story of my whole working life." Now, I may have caught him on a bad morning, but I remember talking to somebody in, I think it was UBS, one of the big banks, where somebody made they made catastrophic decisions, and it just ran all the way down. And this poor person who was counting beans in whatever they were bean counting in a bank, it just impacted the next 5 years. Everything they'd been seeking to build up. The curse of work. That then leaves us asking, in what way is God cursing the ground, going to work out at work? And the answer comes, verses 17 through 19, our second point, the frustration of work. So we're now under point 2, and the frustration of work. And we're going to see work will always be painful. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Work will always be frustrating. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. Work will always be hard. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. And work ultimately will be futile till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken. You are dust. And to dust you shall return. Work is grim. Now, when I first gave these talks back in around about 2016, 17, something like that, there'd been a young lad staying with us on work, and he was doing some stuff in the city, but he'd been doing some manual labour. And in his manual labour, he had to assemble radiator thermostats. And he had to assemble, was it 100? I mean, it's some vast number per hour. I think it was 2 per minute. What does that make? 120? No, 30. Anyway, how many? No, 120, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. See why I'm doing what I'm doing and not what you're doing. So this was intricate and fiddly. I don't know if you've ever taken a radiator thermostat to bits. They're very complex. And he worked for 4 hours, had a 10-minute break, worked for 2 hours, had a half-hour break, worked for 2 more hours, had a 10-minute break, worked for an hour, and went home exhausted. And above his head, on the assembly line, was a board which each hour showed how many he had assembled. Anything below the quota was marked in red. If he failed and the board had more red than blue at the end of the day, he was visited by the management. Those who worked around him largely had been doing the same work for over a decade. There was no other employment in the area. Work is grim. Hoeing turnips. The pain of work. His sister had been working in filing. 4 hours, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes, 2 hours, 10 minutes, home exhausted. Same routine. In her job, she told me, there was no talking. And where people were caught talking, they were disciplined. 2 people had lost their job in the 6 months period that she'd been there. I'm sure all of you HR guys are going, but hey, outside the big corporations, the pain of work. The frustration of work. Do you see it there? Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. Verse 18. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Now verse 18, thorns and thistles it shall bring forth about you. And I talk about it occasionally. We got this interaction in the farming world. One of the things I do on my summer holidays is to cut thistles on a tractor with a cutter behind. Every spring they come back again. And every year we trim the hedges, and they grow again, and brambles blow, and grow, and thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You do your housework, it has to be done again. You iron your shirts, they have to be ironed again. The frustration of work is repeated in every workplace. You work on a deal, you work on a deal, and then just at the last moment, bang, it's gone. Yes, that's what God said would happen. Thorns and thistles that shall bring forth for you. The sweat of work. Do you see that in verse 19? By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. Now this is something. Go to Bangladesh, have a few weeks there staying with a local As you drive along the road in the blazing midday sun, you'll be struck by the sight of women with babies strapped to their hips. Piles of red brick on one side, piles of gravel on the other. There is no gravel in Bangladesh. It's a floodplain, remember? Bricks are baked all across Bangladesh. You see these towers where they're baking bricks out of the silt. Labour is cheap. Women sit by the roadside with their babies strapped to them. A hammer, a pile of bricks, they're making gravel. It's cheaper. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread. Warburgs. When I started in 1998 as rector, I was part of a small Bible study group with some bankers. One of the individuals had been part of Warburgs at the time. It was taken over by what then became UBS, I think, wasn't it? Some of his colleagues as partners, he kept assuring us not himself, had made multi-millions at the takeover. But he often told us of the conversations with those who had made the money. What's it like? Oh, I used to think that having millions would be utterly liberating. Now I find I'm consumed with concern and work at not losing it. By the sweat of your face. So at both ends of the spectrum, here you've got the woman hammering out gravel. Here we got the bloke, multi-millions. And at every level in between, the farmer, the production line worker, the newly qualified lawyer, the junior partner, the doctor, the accountant, the broker, the plumber, the shelf stacker, the mother, the stay-at-home dad, whatever. The pain of work, the frustration of work, the sweat of work. Ah, says somebody, you don't know my work. You know, I'm just so at the cutting edge of it all. You have no idea. I'm absolutely changing the world. You don't know about me. I'm doing, you know, what do they call it? Industry influencing this, that, and the other. The futility of work. Verse 19. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Remember, this is God speaking. He curses the workplace. He frustrates work. So you think you're doing really cutting-edge stuff. You'll do your work. You will retire. Someone will take your place. Who knows what kind of person that might be. And then you'll die. So I've been in the city long enough now to see some of the great iconic buildings. New, razed to the ground. Now, Hal will be able to tell us more about this, because I remember talking with him about it, but near to St. Helens, as you know, there are a number of iconic masterpieces, but there was the old, is it the Crédit Agricole building where the cheese grater currently stands? Is that what it was? Some French something or other, wasn't it? And it was put up in 1968. I remember showing my dad to it, showing it to my dad as it was being pulled apart. He said, but it's new. We're Cornish farmers. I mean, things last forever where we come from. We just keep churning them round and polishing them up and they're rusting away. But at the 1968, at the time, it was considered to be the most complex glass-fronted building in the United Kingdom and one of the first tension structures of its sort. Have I got that right, Hal? Broadly speaking, he's looking was it Collins, Melvin, Ward and Partners at the forefront of it? Some group, or whatever, Gollins or whatever they were called. Yeah, you can't even remember. That's exactly the point. We can't even remember who they were. Who cares? So we kid ourselves that what we're doing is of absolute significance. We gain meaning and satisfaction and purpose. And when people get to my age, they start talking about my legacy. But God's judgment, death, makes a mockery of it all. Turn, if you would, to Ecclesiastes. So you go to the Psalms. I know, you're chuckling to yourself. I'm sorry to take you to Ecclesiastes, but we need to go there if we're going to be wise in God's world and not still at key stage 1 with the 10-year-olds. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. I hated, Ecclesiastes 2:18. I hated all my toil in which I toil. I'll just wait a moment. You get till everybody's there. You go to the Psalms, keep going, Proverbs. Then you'll find Ecclesiastes. Hit Isaiah. Go back. I hated, 2:18, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or an idiot? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is in vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labours under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. Rather wonderfully, somebody was speaking on those verses when one of our church wardens at St. Helens was sitting in the front row on a Tuesday lunchtime, and he had just handed the entire business over to his son. And I'm usually pretty rude, and try and curb that in an act of supernatural intervention. But I did, but on a very rare occasion, for one of the few occasions I refrained from pointing out, I hated all my toil, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he'll be a wise or a fool. In summer of 2005, Steve Jobs stood before that rapturous audience in Stanford University. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, don't settle. October the 5th, 2011, he died. And so death does make futility of everything we do. And we've got to get real about that and be clear. The medics persuade themselves they're doing groundbreaking stuff, and they are. They're doing great stuff. Praise the Lord for those who invented those vaccines. At the end of the day, you're going to die. Whatever breakthrough we make, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, leukemia, dengue, whatever it happens to be, from the ground you were taken, to the ground you shall return. You are dust. To dust you shall return. And there is, I know it's very painful to think about, isn't it? But there is just that moment, this kind of abject sense of futility that we feel at the graveside. Finally, very briefly, the damage of human work. Now again, people don't see this. They don't read the Bible as literature. It is so tiresome, and I think, it must frustrate the Lord so much, and we're only dipping our toes in, and one always feels such a fool when you discover you've not spotted something and been trying to take it seriously for years. But chapter 4, you see, the new section doesn't begin till chapter 5, verse 1 of Genesis, so we're back in Genesis. Chapters 2 and 3, from 2:4 through to the end of 3, work on this glorious pivot, or rather gruesome pivot, around the point of the fall. Chapter 4 sits outside of the internal structure, but within the peace of episode 1. And chapter 4 is fascinating. And I really haven't got my head around it. I'm speaking on it in a few weeks' time, which I'm really looking forward to have another bash at it. But what you find in chapter 4 is Adam and Eve now have been banished from the garden, and the angel with the cherubim with a flaming sword have been placed on the door of the garden. You're never going to get back in. Okay? You're not going to get back in unless supernatural aid comes. And then you've got chapter 4. And the first half of chapter 4 deals with human religion, and you find Cain murdering Abel. And here we see man-made religion giving way to envy, bitterness, hatred, and murder. And that's all man-made religion. You look at man-made religion, we're trying to get back into the garden by our own effort. We can't get back into the garden by our own effort. And so we get jealous of people who say they can, and it just results in this opposition and persecution of the people of God. But the second half of chapter 4 is given over to development of technology and culture. And we find the children of Lamech, who are great inventors, great craftsmen, great cultural pioneers, great horticulturalists, engaging in this human work. But what does all this human development result in? Oh, verse 23. And Genesis chapter 4, verse 23 is simply a multiplication of violence. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, Lamech's is 77-fold. How am I going to use all this advance? Revenge. Vladimir. Internet pornography. Wickedness. Evil. For all our development, the internet, atomic fusion, ability to travel, to plumb the depths of the earth for energy, a corresponding multiplication of the capacity for evil, harm in this broken world. Now, you know what they say about God's word, explaining God's world? Does it not do just that? This makes sense of the world. And here is the world of work. We work all night on a deal. At the 11th hour, as dawn breaks, the plug is pulled, the pain of work. We pour our heart into a project, we labour at, a patient side, we give ourselves to preparing a lesson, whatever it happens to be. Someone somewhere makes a decision or acts in a way that brings the whole enterprise crashing down, the frustration of work. We labour for weeks on a system, it's up and running for a few days, a glitch enters into it from cyberspace. We're back to square one, the toil of work. We give our life to an altruistic, high-minded project. We plan our succession meticulously. The person who we coached and trained takes a different job at the last minute, and our successor is an idiot. And then we die. I had a very stimulating Tuesday morning. It began very stimulating because as I kind of came round, guess who was on the radio? Simon Pilcher was on the radio on the Today programme. So I sprang from bed. I'd like to say, just in case Simon gets too big-headed, my wife was sent soundly back to sleep. But it was a very stimulating start. Then we came to the younger workers' prayer gathering. You know, there are 25 to 30 younger workers, 20 to 30 younger workers gathering to pray. It's a wonderful thing. We were there. And somebody stood up and said this: I'm in an investment setup. We have been seeking to invest ethically for the last decade to save the planet. And so we have avoided solid fuels. And we've been buying gas. We're now in utter turmoil because we've been funding $1 billion a day to the Russian economy, and they've invaded the Ukraine. Well, so what? Well, in just a moment, we're going to move on to a couple of key observations that I hope will give us something to think about and talk about. Before we do that, I want to tackle just one objection. I can hear somebody saying, look, though we're created beings living in God's world, doesn't the creation mandate still stand? And you'll hear a lot of people who talk about work talking about the creation mandate and then a cultural mandate that flows out of it, and they go strong on Genesis 1. I want to say yes and no. Yes, work is still dignified. It's good to work. You're still accountable. And no. And people fail to take seriously the significant change in the commands given to Noah from the command given to Adam. So just push through to Genesis 9, where the mandate is repeated. Genesis 9. Verses 1 through 5. God blessed Noah. Genesis 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything, but you shall not eat flesh with its life in it, that is in its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning from every beast. I will require it from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. So there's no subdue it here. There is fear here. There is need of protection here. The mandate has fundamentally changed as a result of the fall. Now, there's a whole chapter on this in this excellent book on the bookstall, What is the Mission of the Church? Kevin DeYoung has been so helpful in getting us to think about these things. I think it's on page 210, 211 in Kevin DeYoung's book. Listen to what he says. The ultimate goal of Adam's mandate, the subduing of the world to man and ultimately to God, is no longer attainable by him. Yes, humanity will continue to carry out some of the original mandate's provisions, but now only with great frustration and without any hope of actually fulfilling Adam's charge to subdue the earth. His rule is no longer godly dominion, but fearful domination. Well, two implications. First, let's get real about work. I want to suggest that we can be different from our generation who have not got the word of God to enable them to think rightly about work. And this should stop us being sentimentalists at work. Listen to this advert that I saw once on the Underground. Ready? Fast, growing, active and vibrant office seeks able and energetic young person with vision and insight to order and categorize resources. What are they advertising for? You got it. A filing clerk. Now, work is good. Filing clerks are really important. We're so thankful for filing clerks. But I mean, come on, give me a break. If you took that job and were conned from the advert and to think this new job was going to be the answer to any sense of frustration and apparent meaninglessness of work, you would be quickly disillusioned. My observation is that this kind of profound middle-class gullibility about work is what drives so many of us into changing jobs and changing jobs and changing jobs and changing jobs, wanting to find fulfillment, to realize our potential. Rather than thinking about the key thing we're going to think about tomorrow, what is the work that God has given me to do? What is God's work? I'm not saying you should never change a job. But if you've got this endless, restless slavery, I must find my potential and fulfill my potential. And if things aren't quite right, I better move. And I've got to find ultimate satisfaction in my work. Then you'll always be restlessly diseased. My observation, having served in the army for 5 years, is that posting 3 months before you go there, really exciting. First 6 months, yeah, well, you're just about in there. First 6 months, really exciting. 6 months to 1 year, Next year, first 6 months of the next year, is pretty dull. And then you're starting to get excited about the next thing. At least we could change every 3 or 4 years. Every now and then it was very, very exciting indeed. So let's get real about work. Let's grow up at work. Forgive me for putting it like this, but I have lost count of the number of people in their early 40s who come to me and told me that they're finding their job dull for the first time in their lives. They feel they must move to something more exciting. And in the city, I often say, well, look, because you've been able to do a job that is deeply stimulating and you've been protected from what 95% of the rest of the world experienced when they were 16, you're experiencing what most people experience at the end of week 3. When they're 16 and 3 weeks. And that's why 95% of the rest of the world goes out and gets absolutely blasted on a Thursday and Friday night to numb the pain. So I say to my 40-year-old friend, welcome to the real world. You've discovered what the soldiers I worked with for 5 years, with no GCSEs to their name, discovered at 16 and 3 weeks. And with other such encouragements I pass to my dear friends. Do come and see me anytime, my office is always open. So we have to ask them, what are we left with? Is it just get real, grow up, suck up the pain? No. But you'll have to come tomorrow. Make sure you're here first thing in the morning to hear how we can really make something of work. But what I've been aiming to do this morning is to get us to see, why we feel the way we are. Why, from the Bible, God's word makes sense of his world. And I've been wanting to stop off a burrow, if I'm allowed to use that language, which probably I'm not. But I wanted to stop a rabbit hole off. that you couldn't just disappear off into some rabbit hole. No, God is going to frustrate your work in this creation. Oh, yeah, it's going to be painful. It's going to involve sweat. And if you think, oh, well, I'm going to avoid all that, well, it will ultimately be futile, because you're going to die. And that's God's judgment on a broken world.